Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Kate and this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get people talking. From peeps to tweets, a line I can take no credit for, as it's the subtitle of Sally Baillie's excellent book, The Private Life of the Diary. For centuries, people have been writing personal accounts of their lives, through which we can encounter them as individuals and the social circles in which they moved. I love the way that diaries offer such an intimate way of seeing through other people's eyes. Reading Peeps, we can go back in time and experience 17th century London, while reading the Vanity Fair diaries by Tina Brown, I get to find out what it's like to edit a glossy magazine and lunch at the Four Seasons, and on no account, let them give you the table by the wall. Diary writing is a very particular art form, it seems to me, both intensely personal and at the same time carefully constructed, whether consciously or unconsciously. The entries exist as the writer's trace of themselves in the world, captured in time, for others to encounter. For Virginia Woolf, her diaries, which numbered 30 volumes by her death, were her secret companion, her way of recording the world and her place within it, and thinking through ideas for her work. For the contemporary American writer Sheila Heti, the diary offered a chance to create something new, a carefully constructed kaleidoscope of sentences that somehow convey a deep sense of her individuality. 2025 is the year that the Baillie Gifford, that every year awards £50,000 to the best work of non-fiction, gave the prize to Australian writer Helen Garner for the collected volumes of her diaries. Diaries, then, are having a bit of a moment. I sit surrounded by piles of books as I record this, from politicians, from writers, from performers, and from cultural figures. I've read so many diaries these past couple of weeks, it's hard to know where to start, but luckily, I'm not tackling the subject alone. Joining me is journalist Phil Chaffee, an instantly familiar voice to regular listeners and a man for whom the description prodigious reader is entirely accurate. And I'm also delighted to welcome, for the first time, writer, editor, cultural critic and podcaster Lucy Scholes. You will, I'm sure, have come across her writing in places like the FT, the New York Review, LitHub and many other publications of note. She also has made a specialty in discovering forgotten gems from the backlist and is senior editor at McNally Editions, which brings many of her finds back into print. Together, we're going to be considering the appeal of the diary form and pulling out some favourites, which to you may be old friends or new discoveries. That's all coming up here on the Book Club Review. Phil, Lucy, welcome.
Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me, Kate.
What I didn't say in my introduction is that you two are actually old friends. How long have you known each other?
When I first moved to London, I did this course at the Tate Modern with Lucy and one of her colleagues. Actually, a couple courses.
Yeah, which was the first one you did? I can't remember. Was it the Eyes Wide Shut
Eyes Wide
one?
Shut.
Gosh. Yeah, that's a long time ago now. But...
It was a very long time ago. We just had this great mix of people talking cultural references. It was just a fascinating thing. And some of my best friends in London, I actually picked up on those courses.
It was a really lovely mix of people. We had the most wonderful audience. I mean, like Phil says, my friend Richard and I put this course together and it was based on Eyes Wide Shut, the Arthur Schnitzler story, Traumnovelle, Dream Story, which it was based on loosely, and then some Freud case studies and kind of theory. And we didn't know if it would work. We didn't know who would come along. And then we got these most wonderful people like Phil and these incredible others who just were brilliant. And we had such a good time. And then they came back to do other courses and we became friends. And it was just, it was a really, really good time in my life, actually.
Oh, it sounds so nice. It sounds like a very Phil-ish activity, going to some wonderful cultural
No, I need to do more of it. But I just haven't found anything quite as good as Lucy and Richard.
And Lucy, tell us a little bit more about your work. So how did you come to this role at McNally Editions?
I had been writing a lot about neglected books, forgotten books. I'd been writing a column for the Paris Review online for a few years about books that I thought should be brought back into print. And then I was very lucky. Sarah McNally was setting up the McNally Editions imprint and asked if I would come on board as one of the editors. And so it was a really good opportunity to bring back some stuff into print. And now I spend a lot of my time looking for old things that I think are worthy of being rediscovered by new readers.
And is there anything in particular that you're proud of or a particular favourite, or are they like children? Are they all your favourites?
They're all my favourites at different points. There are a couple of real favourites, I suppose, of things that I've discovered on the list. Hey Dick, for example, there was quite a lot written about her when her book They was republished a few years ago. McDally Editions did the US edition, Faber did it here in the UK. She was somebody who I had come across before when I was writing the column for the first time. Another rediscovery I'm very proud of is Dinah Brooke, a wonderful British writer who we have published 2 of her works now, but the second one has just come out. She was a wonderful rediscovery story because everyone thought she dropped off the face of the earth, published 4 novels in the 1970s, and then lived this wild and wonderful life, which I won't go into here because it would take up too much time. But then we tracked her down 50 years later, and it turned out she was living around the corner from me. So that was quite fun.
Wow. I read one of her books that you had rediscovered, but I did not
did
realize...
you? Did you read Lord Jim at
Yes.
home? Yes.
Yeah, it was fun.
Oh, brilliant. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, we've just published Love Life of a Cheltenham Lady, which will be coming out in the UK next month. It's another brilliant book by her.
It must be incredibly satisfying to see these things back in print. So much I'd love to talk to you about, and we're going to come on to our diaries theme. But before we get there, to ease us in, and to get a little bit more of a sense of your reading life, Lucy, I'd love to know what book or books you've got on the go right now.
Well, the only problem with the job I do is that a lot of the time I can't actually talk about the books I'm reading until especially if they're things I'm trying to hunt down. But I am reading a couple of books that are coming out next year, actually, at the moment. One of them is probably be very up your street, is called Part of the Story. It's writings from half a century by Margaret Busby, the publisher and amazing literary figure who's been around on the literary landscape here in London for quite a long time. She published a lot of writers, but she's also a writer in her own right. And this is work that's been collected from the 70s onwards, things that she's written about. And that I'm really enjoying. I've only just started it. And also a newly published forgotten novel, not the one that I'm publishing, but one that's being published by a wonderful small press called Mandalay Press. I don't know if you've come across them. I'm a big fan of their work. And they're publishing a book called Woman Alive by Susan Ertz. This is a story, I think it was written in the 1930s. It's set in a far distant future then, 1985. And there's only one woman left alive after this terrible incident after a pandemic that is caused by the release of some poisonous gas. And again, I'm quite early on in it, so I don't want to give too much away. But I'm really enjoying that. And it's being published in March.
That sounds amazing. And it's been so lovely seeing Mandalay grow from when Rebecca started it, and then now it just feels like it's building into such a fantastic list. And they're so beautifully produced, her books. They're gorgeous objects in their own right, as well as being very carefully chosen titles.
Oh yeah, she puts so much care and attention into them. It's impressive. She is the dream publisher, I think, in so many ways.
And Phil, how about you? I know we always love this bit in the New York Times podcast when they talked about books on their nightstands, and I always want to include that in our shows, but then what always happens is we get so busy talking about the subject of the show, there's never time. So I'm doing it up front, just for you. Tell me, what have you got on the go?
It is always my favorite part. I'm reading much more out there books right now. One is, so I read this year, and I think I'm going to continue a short story every morning, and I work my way through collections. Right now I'm working through the new Curtis Sittenfeld Show Don't Tell, which is great. I think she's even better as a short story writer than a novelist. They're just short, punchy. She plunges you in. It's just a half hour of sheer pleasure every morning. And then, much more seriously, I'm reading this journalistic book from a couple of years ago, Some People Need Killing, by Patricia Evangelista. She's this Filipina journalist who covered the crazy extrajudicial killings, slaughterings under Rodrigo Duterte, who's no longer in power, but he was this crazy populist whose whole thing was, let's just slaughter the drug industry. So drug dealers, but also users, everybody, just abduct them, slaughter them in the streets, slaughter their family. There's crazy stuff, but it's an amazing book. Not quite diaries, but just amazing journalism.
Well, by significant contrast, I was in Oxford the other day, and I always get a bit carried away by the general intellectual ambiance when I go there. And in Blackwell's, I picked up this book, a new book called Look Closer, How to Get More Out of Reading by Robert Douglas Fairhurst, which has just come out. It says, as an English literature professor, Robert Douglas Fairhurst is delighted in sharing his love of reading with his students. Bringing together more than 20 years of teaching, Look Closer explores the iconic works of literature that have formed, sustained and entertained him, from timeless classics like Wuthering Heights and Dracula to modern masterpieces such as Normal People and The Handmaid's Tale. By revealing the simple techniques to slow down, take note and bring a text to life, Look Closer makes clear how literature works and why, in these turbulent times, reading is more relevant than ever. I don't need to be sold on reading as an activity, but I would like some more prompts on how to read more thoughtfully and closely. I feel like this must be how you read, Lucy, and I'm sure it's how you read. It's not generally how I read. I'm really just hungry for plot and turning the pages. So I want to learn to slow down, be a bit more reflective, be a bit more critical.
I suspect you read a lot more closely than I do sometimes. I have no doubt about that.
I'm switching that up with this book, The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. Have you heard of this one?
I think I've heard of it, yeah.
I'm holding up the cover of the US edition, which my husband brought me back from America last week because it's so much nicer than the UK one. But this is interesting because it's one of those sleeper word-of-mouth hits. It was published to not much fanfare and no marketing budget and ended up being championed by Anne Patchett, who, when I started reading it, I realised features in it quite early on, and there's a nice little meta reference. And it's an epistolary novel. It's an older lady whose children have grown up, left home. She's alone, and she's living her life, but she's coming to terms with some challenges. She's worrying she's losing her sight, and various things keep happening on that front that are very disturbing to her. And you get the sense quite quickly that these letters that she's sending out are her way of controlling the world around her, but also of distancing herself from the world. And I thought it was going to be a cozy, fun read, but it's really very much not. It's actually quite unsettling from the beginning. But I have a feeling that things are going to change, and I suspect that's probably where the fun kicks in. But anyway, just an interesting one, and I've been enjoying it so far.
Cool. I think I've heard of that. But again, that word of mouth thing growing slowly.
I think it's currently number 9 on the New York Times bestseller list.
Oh, wow.
And it is always interesting, the word of mouth books, you know, they haven't come out of some publisher's PR hype machine. They've come because people have read it and they've said, oh, this is great, you should read it, and passed it on. And gradually over time, that does build up momentum. But also, I think having Anne Patchett, you know, championing it probably helps a lot as well.
Yeah, there's momentum and then there's momentum, right? Like,
Yeah. Coming up, we're talking all things diaries. And in the excellent book, The Private Life of the Diary by Sally Baillie, I found this suggestion for how to take inspiration from Virginia Woolf in our diary keeping. She writes, find a comfy chair. Woolf liked to sit in an armchair. Plant your feet firmly on the floor. Choose a time that feels a little in between here and there, between tea and dinner, perhaps at twilight in the winter. Your imagination may run more freely then, as the light is fading. You'll forget the obligations of the day. Woolf often wrote between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. Light is crucial when you're writing. Think about the quality of light you prefer. Light sets the mood, and for Woolf, the hours between 4 and 6 held a certain uncanny atmosphere. Sally Baillie there in her book, The Private Life of the Diary. But if Virginia Woolf had possessed a serious reader's lamp, perhaps she would have gone on and written late into the evening. Luckily for us, lighting technology has come a long way since Woolf's day. Serious readers make lamps that are precision reading tools designed to bring us the full, clear spectrum of natural daylight indoors. Like everyone I know who has one, I could not imagine being without my serious reader's lights, and I'm pretty sure Virginia Woolf would have felt the same way. They use their trademark daylight wavelength technology to replicate the full, clear spectrum of daylight, which makes words on the page appear sharper and with better contrast, reducing that feeling of eye strain. And they're recommended by over 500 opticians for that reason. Precision reading lamps are an investment, it's true, but Book Club Review listeners can get the brilliant special offer of £150 off any HD Essential reading light, plus free UK delivery. Go to seriousreaders.com/BCR and use the code BCR at checkout. That's Bravo Charlie Romeo. It's completely risk-free with a 30-day home trial. If you don't feel the difference, they'll collect it for free and fully refund you. So head to seriousreaders.com/BCR and use that code BCR at checkout for £150 off any HD Essential reading light. Right, let's get back to those diaries, shall we? And someone's feeling autumnal. A glorious day, still autumnal and not wintry. We have had a delicious walk in the park, and I think the colouring of the scenery is more beautiful than ever. Many of the oaks are still thickly covered with leaves of rich yellow-brown, the elms, golden sometimes, still with lingering patches of green. On our way to the park, the view from Richmond Hill had a delicate blue mist over it that seemed to hang like a veil before the sober brownish yellow of the distant elms. As we came home, the sun was setting on a fog bank, and we saw him sink into that purple ocean, the orange and gold passing into green above the fog bank, the gold and orange reflected in the river in more sombre tints. I have especially enjoyed this autumn the delicious greenness of the turf in contrast with the red and yellow of the dying leaves. George Eliot there, writing on this day in 1857. I pulled that out because I just thought it is incredible the way that diaries allow people's words to come down to us through time, but in such an intimate way, such a personal way. And I think that's one of the things I really love about them. When I said diaries to you guys, what do you think when you think of diaries? Are they a form that you like to engage with and something that you seek out? Lucy?
Yes and no. It's a strange one, isn't it? There's lots of diaries I love, and I'm sure we're going to talk about loads of them here. I wouldn't necessarily say there's something I go straight to in a bookshop, because I think I started thinking a lot when we were preparing for this episode, once you asked me to be on it, thinking, but why do I read diaries? What do I get out of them? There's so many questions there. And I think a lot of it is to do with individuals, like who's written the diary? Is it a name I know? Do I want to read what they've got to say about the world? And then there are other diaries you stumble across and they tell you about a period in time that you're interested in. And like you say, you get that very intimate account. You get to be inside someone else's mind. I'm also just quite a nosy person, I think, in general. So I really enjoy diaries because they are the most intimate form of writing. Perhaps, though, obviously, you know, there's an argument to be made that it's still all artifice in some shape or form, isn't it? So I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say I seek them out. But then actually, the more I pulled off my shelf in readiness to talk on this episode, I realised that there were actually quite a lot there that I had forgotten that actually, yes, this course, that's a brilliant diary. I love reading it.
Yeah, and I think they can be quite hard to find, can't they, in the bookshop? Because rarely is there a dedicated diaries section. They're often buried in biography, or you might find them in if it's got like a literary section. But as a person who loves diaries and who does seek them out, I find that quite frustrating, and I'm always happy when I come across them. How about you, Phil? Are you nosy?
I think so, yeah. I basically never really read diaries up until a couple of years ago. Sort of like memoirs. They are very pleasurable when you find the right one. I'm a big history geek, so a lot of the diaries I really love are the ones where you're right in it and you see what the world may have been like. Have any of you read Pepys? The complete... No.
A long time, not the complete works, but
wow.
Yeah, I have read Pepys. I mean, I used to teach Pepys.
And I've read bits of Pepys.
Bits of Pepys. But yeah, I think that is, he's living history, and he lives through the Great Plague and...
Great Fire of London.
The Great Fire of London, Charles II... Wasn't he the Minister of the Navy or something?
Yeah, he was quite important, wasn't he?
He was quite important.
Yeah.
But also, he famously was documenting his bowel movements and just where, you know, and the quotidianness of his life. And I think that shows the breadth of what you can get in a diary. Also, you can get, like the George Eliot you just read, the beautiful, beautiful prose, which the readers of just the novels don't get.
I mean, I pulled out Virginia Woolf. I've got the selected diaries, just one volume here. Of course, she wrote copious diaries throughout her life. And I suppose what's interesting is you get this real formation of a person. You know, she goes from quite young, her late teens, I think she starts, all the way through to, obviously she died relatively early, but you get this real sense of metamorphosis from the person she started out as and the person that she became. And I think what I love about Woolf is the sense that she is just sitting on the sofa next to you. She feels like she's right there when you read her. And that actually is incredible, considering in a way how very distant she is from any reality that I inhabit, you know. And yet you can almost hear her. And that's, of course, because she was such a wonderful writer. But also I think she had the qualities that make a great diarist, which is that she was endlessly fascinated by people. She loved to capture conversations. She brought in contextual events, things that were going on in the world, and then you get her own thoughts on those, her reflections. So I think, you know, if you're ever sort of asked to cite a consummate diarist, I do feel like for me, Woolf would be top of the pile. And I certainly read this at quite an early age, and I think really cemented my interest. Like I think I'd done Mrs. Dalloway for A-levels, but I hadn't read any other Woolf. And then I read her diaries, and then I got really interested. So she's sort of there underneath it all for me, even though obviously as an individual she was quite problematic in lots of ways, and as I say, quite remote from me and my life. So let's talk about some of your favourites. Lucy, what's a diary that you love?
This is probably an obvious one. I don't know if you want to talk about it later, but Helen Garner, obviously, who is just one. Baillie Gifford, but I think for really good reason, because those diaries are incredible. And I think she's a really good example of somebody who is obviously incredibly talented as a fiction writer, as a non-fiction writer. Her true crime books are incredible. If you haven't read those, her novels are brilliant. But her diaries, they do feel to me like everything about her is coming together in them. And it's not necessarily because she's doing a little bit of what you're saying with Woolf. There is a sense of her growing over the years. They start in 1978 and end in 1998. So you've got 20 years there. So obviously she's changing and things are happening in her life. But I think in one sense, it is that mixture of the quotidian, this day-to-day existence. She is writing about her writing, she's writing about her work, but she's not necessarily known on a grand scale. She's not a famous writer writing about being a famous writer as such. And they have such a shaped them as well. The final diary, which again, I also don't want to spoil it in a sense because it does read a little bit like a novel, but it's about the end of her marriage. And it reads like one of her novels. She's got this incredible way of structuring it like a novel, bringing this tension into it. And yet these are diary entries. So for me, I feel like she is one of the best. I mean, there's lots of other diaries I love and I find fun to read. But I think in terms of a diarist who is at the peak of their game, I think you can't beat her.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I read what's the first volume of the three separately. It was published by Text Publishing in Australia. And
yes.
So that's actually the first Garner I read because I love diaries. I was like, oh, a diary I haven't read.
Oh, okay.
So that was my way into Helen Garner. And then I was like, oh my God, this is so incredible. Right. I love this writing so much. And the thing I feel about Helen Garner is that when you read her, you don't want to read anyone else. There's something about the pull of her writing that just makes you want to sort of, and I feel I've gone on now to read, I'm working my way now through all the different works, and I feel that each time I read her. But in a way, it's why I haven't read the other two, because I suppose I almost was a little bit too captivated by her. It was like spoiling all other things for me.
You've got such a treat in store. You really have. That final volume is so good.
I'm really looking forward to them.
How greatly one needs declarations in love, and how greatly one fears them, as though they used up something that would otherwise survive longer. Elias Canetti, The Human Province. Awful evening at Elle's kitchen table. His attacks on me, the truth in them, but the way he strengthened their force and ultimately weakened and undermined their truth by the use of irony, or rather sarcasm. You're silent, he says. I'm not like that. It's a powerful position, the silent one. I put my head down on the table and cried with shame, sadness, soreness, regret, relief. M calls, laughing and high-voiced with excitement, to report her exam results. I knew the mail would be there early, so I made myself some breakfast and strolled to the post office as if there was no hurry. I got 2 letters, and I even made myself read the other one first. I shower her with praise. Don't feel you have to move out as soon as you get back, she says. It'd be good to spend some time with you in the house before we part. People have been staying over a lot, some in your bed, but don't worry, I always make it nice again. V reads me some of his new novel. It's very good. Dry, completely competent, full of fancies that make me burst out laughing. He reads badly, in a stubbornly unemotional voice, as if gritting his teeth to do it.
A clip there from One Day I'll Remember This, the 3rd volume in Helen Garner's diaries, published by Belinda and read by the author herself. And yeah, of course, when the collected edition came out, which is a beautiful, thick paperback book, I bought it straight away, thinking I would enjoy very much reading the second 2 volumes. But it just waits for me on the shelf, patiently.
You'll get there. You'll get there.
Phil, how about you?
Lots of options. I'm going to...
Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start with Chips Channon, who's, I think, very different from Helen Garner.
Is this like political diaries? Was he a politician?
Yeah, ish. Yeah. I've actually only read the first. These are poems. They were recently republished a couple of years ago. I think they were initially published in a much more Baudelarized version in the 70s, I want to say. But he was, yes, a politician. He was an MP for a while. He was actually American from some very wealthy Midwestern family. And he came over right after World War I to Europe and then was just this insufferable snob who slotted in first to the French elite, but mainly to the English upper crust, where think like Jeeves and Wooster, but think slightly more fascist, like just awful people. But he's just very funny. And he also, he's at a dinner party next to Proust, and there's lots of famous people in here and royals and this and that, but it's just really funny, really bitchy stuff. He's also married, but also closeted and gay. I have heard that so I think I read up through the mid-30s. He then was, I think, a minister at some point. He was in government, but he was never super important. But he was in Parliament, and he had lots of bitchy gossip about everybody. And he also was part of the closeted gay underbelly of Parliament, which it turns out in this country, I feel like has always been like very robust as far as I can tell. But they are a delight. He can be very anti-Semitic. He can be very sexist. He can be, he also like goes over to, in the 30s, to Nazi Germany, and is just like wowed by how great it is. This is pre-Holocaust and everything, but it's still grim stuff. But a lot of the British elite at that time was doing the same stuff.
Yeah, like the Mitfords.
Yeah, Unity Mitford. And and so, it's very much that circle.
Yeah.
It's fun. I will read the rest at some point, but it's very different from Helen Garner.
I like the comparison.
Monday the 3rd of October, 5 Belgrave Square. Honor and I motored up, and I rushed to the Foreign Office. The storm breaks over the government this afternoon for having preserved peace. I was out of sorts and unsuccessful. With great difficulty, I obtained a ticket for the Commons for my mother-in-law, who wanted to hear the PM. As I was waiting for her, I ran into Eric Duncannon, who wanted something to eat. I took him to the stranger's dining room, and in the course of our talk, he admitted that he hoped for Chichester, to succeed Jack Courtauld. A gorgeous seat, better even than Southend. One day, but not at the present rate, Eric and I may be the only Tories left in the HFC. When my mother-in-law arrived, there was no ticket. In a frenzy, I rushed about and at last found her one. The big debate began. I could scarcely control my rage against the wicked insurgents who, from ambition, stupidity, and hatred of Chamberlain, would now upset the government. They are led by Winston Churchill, that angry bullfrog, slave of a prejudice, and, of course, that ass Anthony Eden, who is one of the most unaware, ill-informed people I have ever known.
Tom Ward there, reading from Henry Chips Channon, The Diaries, published by Penguin Audio. I realise in our different stacks, the way to group them probably is to think more in terms of voices from particular eras. I know, Lucy, you mentioned you were going to talk about James Leese Mill, and I feel like he perhaps follows on from that.
Yeah. I think just when you were talking there, the Mitfords, they crop up in his diaries a lot. He's definitely moving in similar circles, though he's slightly more intellectual, I think, a little bit more bohemian, let's put it that way. I think I had read Ancestral Voices, the first volume. There are 3 volumes in particular that he wrote during the war and just thereafter, which was when he was employed by the National Trust to go around the UK and look at old buildings and say, yes, we want them, or no, we don't want them. So in a way, the setup is wonderful, because what he's doing is he's going to all these far-flung places. He's meeting these mad people. They're really crazy, a lot of them, who live in these old houses that are falling apart around them. And so he's got a great cast of characters already there. And I think because it's wartime as well, there's a lot of weirdness going on. Day-to-day life is strange, and he's having to go up against getting the train to places that's broken down, or motoring out somewhere but with not enough coupons to buy gas and things like this. And then in the second volume, there's definitely a lot more about the war and that, the bombings that are happening in London and things. But you get this wonderful cast of characters, but you also get the sense of him as a person. He can be quite snappy in his judgments. That's maybe the wrong way of putting it. He's not judgmental at all, but he's got a very good eye for what's going on around him. He talks a lot about what he's eating as well, I've noticed. I was thinking that this time round. It's like always where he lunched, what he lunched on, which again, maybe is something to do with the war, but he's always, oh gosh, I ate really badly today, or ate too much lobster and then got really ill afterwards or something. And he seems to be plagued by ill health as well. That's a lot of it. I really enjoy them. And every now and then you get a snippet of what it's like. He'll say interesting things about diary writing. He'll suddenly say something, he'll be talking with a friend about what the point of diaries is. He talks at one point about Noel Coward's diaries, and he thinks that they will be the document through which him and his peers are known in perpetuity, as it were, which is probably true to a certain degree. But then he also says something very interesting, I think, in the third volume, which is set just after the war. He says he thinks it's going to be a wartime diary to begin with. And so when the war ends, he keeps writing for a few months, and then he just goes, I'm going to leave this now. And that's the end of the second book. And then you get the third book. And at the beginning of that, he says, you're probably wondering why I picked up the pen again. Why did I do this? And he says, I felt like I wanted to. But he says something really interesting. Why did I pick up this diary again? There is no explanation. I merely missed it like an old friend. It has never intentionally been a confessor to whom I suppose a good Catholic tells all, and being a bad Catholic, I used, when I went to confession, to skate lightly over sins I had in mind, while emphasising those that I was less inclined to, and fancied I might with an effort abandon altogether. So too, being cowardly, I treated, and shall continue treating, my diary like an intimate friend who mustn't know everything. If a man has no constant lover who shares his soul as well as his body, he must have a diary, a poor substitute, but better than nothing. And I thought that's so interesting, because he clearly needs to unburden himself to a certain degree, but at the same time he's saying, I'm not going to tell this diary everything. I'm not going to write down my intimate thoughts. And so there's always something in these diaries which I feel like you're never quite able to grasp the inner reaches of his mind, which again, I think I quite like.
It's such an interesting form of writing, isn't it? Because on the one hand, it's a person communing with themselves, right? Writing privately for themselves. And yet in the very act of writing something down, there's this awareness that potentially it could be read. And actually, quite possibly, especially someone like Lise Milne, wanting it to be read, wanting to set this down for posterity. So on the one hand, there's this revealing of the private self and your private thoughts. But on the other hand, there's a sense of a constructed composer. I mean, Pepys was doing this, right? He was very depicting himself as this important man and the successful life he had, and tallying up what he'd achieved in any given year. Which, of course, has all come down to us today. But I can't think of anything else that does that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the appeal of diaries is the idea that you're getting as close as possible to a real person's thoughts. I do think for most of them, there's another layer of curation, which is the editing, either posthumous or the self-editing for someone who's still alive. Some of our examples, even Helen Garner, I doubt those diaries are precisely the physical diaries. Do you think? I don't know.
No. I think they are edited. I mean, because of course it's a process. And I think there is a big difference, isn't there, between a writer who edits their own work like Garner has done for publication, and there is a story that is being told here in a shape that she is imposing on the narrative she's telling. Or if it's an outsider, an editor who's thinking, well, that diary entry is boring, or no, I won't put that one in, or we'll cut this little bit out, right?
Right.
And then there are writers who do know that they are writing for publication, because this is very much part of their way of engaging with the world. And I've got a couple here that perhaps sort of bring us up to the contemporary age. Alan Bennett and Michael Palin, who go very nicely hand in hand, but actually are very, very, very different diarists. There's so much to love about both of them, I think. I actually didn't know that much about Alan Bennett, apart from the fact that he existed. I never really... No, that's not true. Of course, I'd seen The History Boys. I thought that was amazing. I knew about The Lady in the Van. I remembered the Talking Heads from when I was growing up. But he never really seemed to me like... I just never quite understood the appeal. That was before I read his diaries. And his diaries are so wonderful. It's really hard to describe what's so great about them, because they're quite laconic. And he seems like someone who actually is a very private man, very reserved, and not someone who particularly likes being in a social world. And yet this seems to allow him this ability to observe in a way that he does so beautifully. And the way that he pulls together his observations and reflections, it just makes you feel warm. And there's something very complete about the way that he writes that's incredibly satisfying. And obviously it's a very particular perspective on the world, but you get a kind of cultural history of the past, not 100 years, but so he was in Beyond the Fringe in the 60s. I think that's sort of where he first came to attention, as part of a gang with Peter Cook, Dudley Moore. Who was the other one? Oh, Jonathan Miller. and Alan Bennett. They were at Oxford, they performed this comedy show, and it did quite well, and that put them all on the map, and then they all went off to do different things. And Bennett concentrated mainly on writing and wrote many pieces for the theatre and for television that were very successful. So throughout his whole life, he had a sort of almost like guaranteed way of being published. His plays were produced at the National Theatre by Nicholas Hytner, and his television work was all lapped up by the BBC. So he's kind of had a really interesting and frictionless career in lots of ways. He's a very engaging person to read. And the book I particularly loved is Writing Home, which is a collection of diaries, but also you get these essays, and then you get the text from Lady in the Van. There are a few things in here which are just, you get the backstory. And that's been a delight. But then it crosses over with Michael Palin because they were contemporaries and they knew each other, they're friends. So sometimes in the Alan Bennett diaries, you'll get a mention of Palin, and then vice versa, like had lunch with Alan Bennett. And you compare and contrast if you happen to be doing a deep dive like I was. Michael Palin's diaries, I know and love. The latest volume came out quite recently, and that is There and Back, which is 1999 to 2009. Which is volume 4. He is quite a prolific diarist. He writes consistently almost every day, has done throughout his entire career. So in the first volume, you get all of the Monty Python stuff, you get the Life of Brian, the Holy Grail, all of the shenanigans going on with that, which is really interesting to read about. And then he gets into, I think volume 2 is the Round the World, 80 Days, stories, that period. And again, like Bennett, he's someone who is intimately connected with British cultural life and knows everybody and gets invited to all these things. But unlike Bennett, is really outgoing and quite engaged in the world. And so it's almost like the flip side. Reading Michael Palin, you just feel you're with such a charming, lovely companion with such energy and zest for life. I think that's what I'm really humbled by with Michael Palin's diaries, is he's always doing something. I don't know how he does it.
Saturday, January the 2nd. A long, full sleep would seem to have been the logical consequence of a serene and restorative New Year's Day. But once again, that worry about being really good at anything, even sleeping, seems to have risen from somewhere. And I slept quite lightly, waking often, listening to the winds another low-pressure system blows in from the west. Ken Cranham and Fiona, both actors, come round for tea and pictures. Ken knows painting. It was either art school or drama school for him when he was young, like Ralph Richardson. And we look at my paintings and enjoy discussing them. He was lined up for a new TV series that had been written for him, but Peter Salmon, controller of BBC One, judged him to be too old. Just as well, really, says Ken. There was an awful lot of sex in it.
Michael Palin there, reading from There and Back, the 4th volume of his diaries, published by Weidenfeld and Nicholson. Lucy, who else have you got on your stack?
Well, another diarist I do really like, I'm doing their mid-century stuff at the moment, but Joan Wyndham's diaries from the war. Love Lessons is the first volume, and then Love is Blue. These have always delighted me. They've just delighted me. She's very young when she's writing the first one. I think she's only 17 at the time. And so it is 1939 and the war is about to break out, or it has just broken out. And her life is upended. And they're just hilarious, though. I mean, all I remember from them as well, and in a weird way, I didn't go back and reread them because I wanted to just stick with what I'd remembered in my mind. And all I remember is she's on a desperate urge to lose her virginity. She's constantly taking benzodiazepines to stay up all night and be wired as hell. She's drinking like a fish and she's out at every party. And it sounds like such a riot of a time. But obviously also the war is going on. And so there's a lot of tragedy mixed in, sort of ordinary everyday tragedy for the war. She's got such an engaging voice. She's got such an energetic vigor to her writing. She's young. She's excited about life. She's living through these turbulent years. If anything, it's the perfect mixture of the right voice, the right time, and doing the right things, basically. And so, yeah, they're just great fun to read.
And who was she? That's new to me. I haven't heard of her before.
She was a writer. She did a variety of things, as in, on the dust jacket it says, since 1945, Joan Wyndham has led a rich and varied life, including running Oxford's first espresso bar, running a hippie restaurant in London's Portobello Road, cooking at major pop festivals, and more recently catering for actors at the Royal Court Theatre. She's also worked in Fleet Street and women's magazines as a food and wine critic in London and New York. I think she wrote these diaries quite early on, and then she lived a jobbing life. She always knew a lot of interesting people. And there is a third volume in the diaries, if I remember correctly, from when she's older and the war is over. She's just one of those people who was around and doing interesting things. And there's always fun people coming in and out of the stories as well.
Which is what you want in your diarist, isn't it?
I think so, to a certain extent. I was thinking about that. It's another question. Like, do you want to read about, one of the joys of reading diaries as well is seeing famous people, isn't it? Through other people, like people who hang out with a lot of famous people can see why they write diaries, because that's going to be fun to write about. And it's really fun for us to read. But then there are also other diaries that don't have to include that, but this is a subset of it.
I mean, would this be the moment to talk about Tina Brown?
Probably. Yeah. Have you read it, the Vanity Fair diaries, Lucy?
This is a huge oversight in my reading life, I feel, because it's so funny. Maybe it's just because I know Kate mentioned that she wanted to talk about it today, but also I feel like suddenly I started hearing people talking about these sudden, I mean, I had heard about them before, don't get me wrong, but suddenly I'm hearing people talking about them left, right and centre, and people who otherwise I wouldn't necessarily think would have loved these are saying, these are amazing. Like, I just couldn't put them down. So I realised I have to go out and buy a copy tomorrow, basically.
They are delightful. I mean, Tina Brown, for those who don't know her, was just this journalistic wunderkind. She started at Tatler, I think.
Tatler here in the UK, when it was quite staid sort of society magazine, and she really was the one who brought it up to date, glamorized it. Suddenly it became something that people actually cared about and wanted to read.
And then she was brought over, I forget all the precise sequence, but she was brought over by Cy Newhouse, who owned Condé Nast. Condé Nast publishes Vogue, it publishes, he ultimately bought the New Yorker, GQ, and they relaunched Vanity Fair, which had been a men's-ish magazine in the 20s and 30s in New York. They relaunched it, and then a year or two after, it wasn't going great, and he brought Tina Brown in. And she comes to New York in the mid-'80s and turns it around, meets everybody. She can write. She can just write about anything, and it is so fun. Then there are names galore. You just feel like you are there on the ground with her as she's being courted by Cy Newhouse, her relationship with him, but also the other people around. The Graydon Carter and Anna Wintour all pop up. Boris Johnson pops up. Tons of people pop up. It is just outrageously fun.
It's so much fun. And she doesn't shy away from... I mean, the one thing I think about it is it's very much... I'm so great, I'm so great, I'm so great. Like, you don't begrudge her it for a second, because she is amazing.
She sounds so great, right?
Yeah, no, totally fair enough. But at the same time, I think that was the one thing I felt when I'd finished it, was like, wow, Tina, come on, like, you blow your own trumpet much. But just, for example, the salary negotiations. She goes out to New York. She basically completely turns Vanity Fair around. She's so great. She's just like, what do people want? I've got all these incredible, like Annie Leibovitz, she's not being used. Helmut Newton's on the books. Like, I'm going to get them to do this amazing work, and brought in all these fantastic writers. And suddenly the whole thing's got energy and is actually interesting and beautiful to look at. And she really understands how to package things up. She really gets that. And it's really fun to see that. If you love the September issue, the film about Vogue, this is almost that in book form. It's sort of that sort of pleasure. It's great fun seeing the inside workings of how this glossy magazine is put together. But she does really brilliantly, and the magazine circulation does go up exponentially. The numbers show that what she's doing is working. So then there's this absolutely riveting section where she basically then is like, okay, hang on a minute. I don't think my salary really is reflecting what I've done here. And I know the value of what I've produced for you. So here's how I'm going to go about negotiating a better deal, basically. And she just takes you through it all. And it's just so interesting. And I mean, she's such a player. That's the thing. Now, I know this is in her own words, so you have to take some of it with a pinch of salt. But I think that's the thing that you really come away with, is such a sense of everything was run by men. These powerful men who ran publishing, who ran the magazine world, who ran everything, right? And she's right in there, playing them at their own game, playing them off one another, doing it brilliantly and astutely and politically, and coming out on top. And it is just so gratifying. You really root for her. And then, yeah, she does brilliantly. There's an interesting slight tonal shift when she then moves to the New Yorker, which was much less of an obvious fit
And not as successful.
And not as successful. But then for so many other reasons, I think, than sort of, just she wasn't right. I think, in some ways, she probably was what it needed, but that was a much more of a cultural clash. And that's interesting, hearing about that side of the story from her perspective.
There's actually a book that came out this past year, and I'm blanking on the journalist's name, by this journalist called Empire of the Elites, about Vanity Fair in the 80s, 90s, and aughts. And the thesis is just how much Vanity Fair, via Vogue, GQ, all these things, also by bringing Donald Trump to prominence, played this outsized role in the culture and in history. I read that back to back with this one.
Oh, interesting.
That one, you get a lot more perspectives, you get better profiles of Cy Newhouse and all these other people. But this one, by being diaries and also being written by Dina Brown, you're just in there and you're rooting for her. And I got the sense from this of like, oh, I am sort of like going to these power lunches at whatever Upper East Side
you feel like you're there.
You feel like you're there.
She's great.
In a way that journalistic book is great, and I highly recommend. And actually, they really complement each other. But this is just such a great ad for Diaries.
Yeah. So I've got Helen Garner to look forward to, and you've got Vanity Fair Diaries.
Yeah.
I was at a party in London, and Tina Brown was there, and I saw her walk in. And I had a real moment of like, am I going to go up to Tina Brown and tell her how much I love the Vanity Fair Diaries? And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I kind of slunk away. That's the kind of anecdote you get if I kept a diary.
The social energy of the 80s in New York was ferocious. When did I sleep? It turns out to have been an asset that I'm allergic to alcohol. Most of these accounts of dinner parties probably wouldn't have happened if I'd had a glass in my hand. By the time I became editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair in January 1984, Ronald Reagan was on a glide path to re-election. He had made an improbable journey from radio announcer to mid-level movie star to union leader to television host to two-term governor of California to President of the United States. Reagan's ascent to the White House marked the definitive end of one era, that of the turbulent 1960s and its threadbare 70s endgame, and the supersonic launch of another Gilded Age. Tax cuts for the wealthy in 1981 unleashed animal spirits on Wall Street. There were new buzzwords like junk bonds and arbitrage. Go-getters in suspenders, their eyes ablaze with the thrill of winning, thrived in an orgy of mergers and acquisitions. As Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan put it when asked to define the 80s, we borrowed $1 trillion from the foreigners and used the money to throw a big party.
Tina Brown there, reading the introduction to her Vanity Fair Diaries, published by Orion. That's brought us a bit more up to date. Any others in your stacks? Do we need to go back in time, or are we staying in the present?
For history buffs, there is something about being on the ground when you're really documenting history. So I had two quick ones I just wanted to slot, also from World War II. One is William Shirer, who was an American journalist who ultimately worked for CBS in the 1930s in Berlin. He then, after the war, wrote one of the earlier definitive histories of the Nazis and that era. But during the war, I mean, he's running all over Germany as a foreign correspondent, so he gets access to all of the top leaders. But also his diaries give these logistics of how exactly it would work, because this was the very beginning of live radio broadcasting. But the infrastructure was controlled by the Nazis, by the German state. So they would have to give these scripts to be censored and try to communicate what's going on when they couldn't talk about. So he's even there as the war kicks off before America enters the war, but he can't communicate the scale of the bombings of German cities or things like that. So it's this fascinating process. The other one I'd quickly like to highlight is Iris Arrigo. Do you know her, either of you?
Yeah, I've read some of her work.
Yeah, so she's a author. She was also a historian who wrote this amazing, actually slightly diary-ish, this amazing history of this 14th century merchant, the Diary of Prato, based on this guy's correspondence who's going all over Europe, setting up this mercantile network with his wife. And she found all these letters and did this amazing book. She was this American-British woman who married into this family of Italian aristocrats and owned this beautiful farm And this book, it's actually a series of diaries. The one I've read is War in Val d'Ocia. I don't know, part of my Italian. An Italian war diary, 1943 to 1944. What is fascinating about this is she is there while the Americans and British, first invade the Allies, invade Sicily, and then start working their way up the boot. The Nazis have come down and occupied. And this diary takes you through that period. There's this period of days and weeks where it's very unclear who's in control. There's troops coming one way, there's Nazis the other way. Anyone could kill you. There's random resistance popping up in the woods, wounded, this and that. It's absolutely exhilarating and also fascinating because it's one of those questions in war when like troops are leaving or coming in, what is the actual experience on the ground like for the civilian? And it's really beautifully written and it's a page turner.
New York Times said a remarkably moving document that, like the best of the elemental war stories, eventually becomes a statement about the unplanned nature and folly of war. Yeah, I'd never heard of that. It's a beautiful Pushkin edition.
How to follow that? The one I did want to talk about, which I don't think is particularly well known, I don't think it's in print in this country, I think it is still in print in America, is a book called Russian Journal by the American writer Andrea Lee. And this was published in 1982, and it is the account of the author's time living in Russia in 1978. She moved there with her husband. So he was a Harvard professor. I think he was there on a sort of government exchange program. He was a Russian expert. He spoke very fluent Russian. She really didn't. She had never been to the country before. And obviously, this is a really interesting period for two Americans to be living in Russia and getting on with their lives there. Andrea Lee, she's a Black American writer. Interestingly, the journal does not go into race a lot. If anything, she's much more, her presence in Russia is much more interesting as she is like an American outsider wearing Western clothes. People very rarely comment on the colour of her skin, which is quite intriguing because, again, I think at this period, you'd be expecting something slightly different maybe from the writers. And I just remember coming across this. I found an old secondhand copy a few years ago and I just loved it. It was such an interesting insight. It's not, I mean, it doesn't tell you, I think I read some reviews that said she could get more political or she could tell you more about, you know, how Russia works or really dive into all this stuff. But that's not the point of it. The point is it's just telling the story of what it was like for her and her husband to be there. And so everything is kind of strange and new to them. They're excited about it. She meets really interesting people and you get this very intimate account of what it is like to come and live there and what it's like then how her everyday encounters with the ordinary Russians she meets. I say ordinary Russians, I mean, obviously she's moving in quite kind of intellectual circles. She's meeting students, she's meeting other well-educated people. So she's probably not seeing what it's like across the entire country. But I think it's a little gem. And as the back cover here says, it was hailed as a minor classic when it was first published, which is such an which is always such a sort of terrible thing to say about a book, I think, in many ways. But I would really recommend it. I didn't know much about, I mean, I'd read bits and pieces about Russia during those years, but not a lot. The other one I wanted to mention, which is a little bit cheeky because it's a McNally Editions book, we're publishing it next year, but I think it is very relevant to this, is this really fascinating book called Beloved Son Felix. We've subtitled it Coming of Age in the Renaissance by a guy called Felix Platter. This is set back in 1552, so it's incredibly old. And what's interesting about this, we've got a new foreword by Stephen Greenblatt, and he writes in the foreword that keeping diaries and writing autobiographies in any shape or form doesn't become widespread practice until the mid-17th century. So Platter is writing this incredibly early, and it's a really fascinating account. He leaves his home in Switzerland when he's 16 years old, and he journeys to Montpellier in France to study medicine. And so what you get is the account of his studies, you get the 5-year period where he's living through plague, he's living through war, he's living through being a teenager. I mean, it's mad. In one scene, he's witnessing executions, and in the next, he's learning to play the lute and then throwing oranges at people in this big fight. I mean, it's a really, really odd, very vivid book. The tone is different to a contemporary diary. You know, he's not writing that with any sense of what other diaries are like or how to go about writing a diary or even thinking about, I mean, I don't know whether he's thinking about posterity. It's so interesting, but it's definitely one that I would recommend as well to people if they're interested in diaries.
Amazing. And that's going so far back in time.
Right. It's so far back. And so it is a really interesting book because even if you're not, and I'm certainly not a history buff like Phil, so sometimes the more historical diaries I keep my distance from. I want more gossip or interiority and things like that. And so this for me is definitely a little bit different because it doesn't have the same sort of interiority as a modern diary. I think because it sounds like it's crazy to say, but interiority is not something that a 16-year-old in 1552 is really comprehending in the same way that a contemporary someone today is. So you get a really interesting insight into how the mind works at a different point in history.
Phil, are you staying in the past or are you coming back to the present?
I mean, I could go on and go on.
I know, I keep thinking of other diaries. As you were talking, I was thinking about, have you ever read, there's a wonderful book called Diary of a Tuscan Bookshop by Alba Donati.
No.
Which I talked about actually many times on the pod, but so good. She's this woman who is living in a tiny Tuscan hill town. There's like 1,000 people that live there. And she decides that what it really needs is a bookshop. But there's no infrastructure for a bookshop. There's no market. There's just these few people. And she's not dismayed or daunted by this. She decides to go ahead with it. And the way that she makes it work is she makes it a community-run operation. She gets people... It's a really wonderful story about how she engages people in that community and they come and they help run the shop and they're all very invested in its success. And gradually then over time, people start coming to the town because they want to visit the bookshop. And so it's this really lovely story about how the town and the bookshop support each other in a way. And she's moved back there because that's where her mother is from. And she's basically moving there because her mother is too old to be able to look after herself. And so you also get this story of her looking after her mother at these very last stages of her life. And that's very interesting because they had quite a problematic relationship. So that there's a lot of interesting family dynamics and stuff in there. And of course, she writes about the books, her favourite books, the books she loves to hand sell. It's just a really gorgeous memoir, but in diary form. It's a day-by-day account of how she did it all. And I really loved it when I came across it. It's so great. I feel like I've wasted one of my... I had to put Nina Stibbe to one side now because I've talked about Alba Donati instead. Phil, have we got one more from you?
This has been sitting here. I actually pulled it off of your shelf because I listened to it. This is Derek Jarman's Modern Nature. Surely you've read this one, Lucy, right?
I have.
It is gorgeous. Derek Jarman was this filmmaker, experimental filmmaker who made these gorgeous, lush movies in the 1980s. In 1986, he was diagnosed with HIV and I think he already had the cottage. He moved to his cottage in Dungeness, which for those who don't know, is on the southeast coast of England. It's this there's a now retired, then operational nuclear power station, but it's on this weirdly lunar part of the coast.
It's a shingle spit.
Sure.
I think it might be the longest shingle spit in Europe.
There we go.
It's pebbles. It's not sort of sand in the sea. It's a long, long, long expanse of pebbles.
So it was sort of off most people's radar. He had this cottage and started this beautiful garden, which the cover of this book, I assume, is the garden, right?
Oh, yeah.
This cottage has become this place of pilgrimage where people go. I think someone lives there, but people go and try to see it, partly because this book is so gorgeous and so profound. The book itself, I think, is only around a year of his diaries, and he is obviously coming to terms with mortality, but also living his bohemian life. There are some other bohemian, Tilda Swinton shows up, but it is mainly just this thinking about, he's on the shore, so he's thinking about the sea, he's thinking about mortality, he's thinking about this nuclear power station, he's thinking about gardening and making art, and all of the art he really still wants to make, even as his horizon is shortening and shortening. It sort of has everything you want, and it has bits of history, it has some names, but it's also just gorgeous writing. And yeah, I can't, it's one of the best ones out there, I think.
I do think it's amazing. I found it quite a melancholy read. I actually found it quite hard to read for that reason, because you care about him and it's really sad what's happening. There's a wonderful book that's called Pharmacopoeia, which is an edited selection of his diaries, particularly focusing on his writing about nature. I picked up a copy of that in a bookshop, one of my favourite bookshops, Pritchard and Ure, which is this wonderful bookshop that's in a garden centre near me here in Camden. And anyway, I picked that up there because it was just such a gorgeous object. It's such a beautiful book in and of itself. But what I loved actually was it felt like I was able to experience this extraordinary writing and that kind of intimacy with him, but without all the sadness. So if you just feel modern nature might be a bit much or you try it, actually there are other ways of getting to experience his writing and his world that maybe aren't quite the sort of the difficult. I don't know. It's not hard to read, is it? But like I say, I found it sad.
I arrived at dusk in the nursery set in its little square under the plane trees. It's a romantic place. Walking around in the deepening gloom through the rows of plants, you are drawn into dreams of long summer days, looking at the aging photos above each plant. Rosamundi, rose of the world, with its crimson and blush-striped flowers, an old sport from the apothecaries, Rosa officinalis, the rose of Provence. It was brought back by a 12th century crusader and immortalized by Guillaume de Loris in his poem The Roman de la Rose. When I took my roses to pay for them, I found my old friend André manning the till. He laughed at the idea of my wilderness garden.
That was Julian Sands reading from Modern Nature, published by Audible Studios. This has been a podcast of opposites, hasn't it? Very quickly, I didn't want to leave her out. Nina Stibbe wrote this wonderful book called Love, Nina, which was a series of letters that she wrote to her sister when she was in London working as a nanny for Mary Kay Wilners, who you may or may not know is the founding editor of the London Review of Books. She lived in this interesting house near Primrose Hill and had 2 boys and obviously quite busy working and was single mother. So she employed Nina to look after the children. And so you get these letters from Nina back home and you get to hear about this cast of people that Nina interacted with, one of whom is Alan Bennett, who lived a few doors down and used to come over regularly, basically for meals. So that's partly why I had, I think, a slightly dismissive attitude towards Alan Bennett, because I'd only really ever encountered him via Love, Nina. And Nina Stibbe is extremely unimpressed by this man of letters who basically can't cook his own tea. Anyway, she then went on to write some novels, which I think have done very well. I think they were very well received. I haven't actually read any of her fiction, but then she came back with this diary, which is called Went to London, Took the Dog. And it's a year in her life where she was unhappy in her marriage. She was living down in Cornwall. Her children are almost grown up by this point. So she comes back to London. She's going to take almost like a sabbatical from her life kind of thing. She has this London year that's an opportunity to reflect and get a bit of distance from her domestic world. And this is her diary of that time. She ends up living in the house of Deborah Mogok, who wrote the best exotic Marigold Hotel, which then went on to be made into a West End show, which was incredibly successful. So you get that, you know, on that little, like, again, what she's brilliant at writing about all these people from the sidelines. So you get that kind of story of what's going on in that. But also she's friends with Nick Hornby. They do pub quizzes together. You just kind of get this little window into people that she knows, but also just ordinary people who you've never heard of. And she's equally interesting on them. It's delightful in every way and a real slice of life that she just captures beautifully. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was something completely different from everything else we've discussed. Sheila Heti reinvents the form, arguably, with her alphabetical diaries. So this is such an interesting book. It's published by Fitzcarraldo. I've got a rare white Fitzcarraldo that doesn't have a thumbprint on it. Have you ever seen one that doesn't have a thumbprint on? I keep marvelling at it. It's amazing. I've never had one that was so pristine. And it stayed that way. But yeah, she wrote, here we go, I'll read from the back. She collected 500,000 words from a decade's worth of journals. She put them into a spreadsheet and she sorted them alphabetically. She spent the next 10 years cutting and refining and was left with 60,000 words of brilliance and mayhem, joy and sorrow. These are her alphabetical diaries. So every chapter is a letter from the alphabet, and in that section, all the sentences start with that letter. So I'll read you a tiny bit of K just to give you a sense of it. Keep a list of all the people you need to speak to and read the books you need to read. Keep good track of your receipts. Keep in mind that none of these projects will make you any money. Keep it in a container and publish only what has reached the next stage of accomplishment. Keep the energies in your body and contain them. Keep the house clean and neat. Love him, love family and friends. Keep this paragraph that will ruin the whole entire thing. Keep this paragraph, the ugly worm that will eat all the papers and destroy it. Keep your eye on the distant justification for all this. Killing evil thoughts. Knew it would only last a day. Knocked out my tooth this morning and can't find my gold coin. Know how to love a man by knowing how to love writing. Know there is always an alternative to the situation, even being very babyish and all alone. And that is K, and then it goes on to L. You would think it wouldn't work. You would think it would be weird or annoying or disjointed. And what's remarkable about it is that it's none of those things. There is a kind of poetry to it. There is something very extraordinary about the way that even though it is so fragmented, things recur. Ideas, people, motifs, things come back again and again. And you get this real sense in this sort of strange way because it's such a kaleidoscope. But at the same time, it's very composed and very carefully composed, and it feels it. So you do get this really quite extraordinary sense of her, and also just it's pleasurable. It is pleasurable to read. But I do feel it sort of, for me, sits in that zone where poetry is. That sort of feeling I get when I'm reading poetry is how I felt reading the Alphabetical Diaries. It's not quite like anything else I've ever read. And I actually do really love it. I haven't finished it. There's nothing really pulling me through it. But every time I go back to it, I do really enjoy it. And I marvel all over again at how successful it is, I think.
Read a bit every morning like Phil's doing with short stories.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
It would work really well for that.
Just read a letter over
just
24 days, yeah. Yeah, I loved this one. It's obviously very experimental, completely deconstructed. You got a sense of that just from Kay. Like, she is, I mean, it's alphabetical, but you get this organization by syntax where keep the, you get these advice sentences and then you move on to something else. You also get, I was just flipping through because I was trying to remember some of the names. There's a Lars who pops up a lot and there's a Piper. But if you go to the Lars section, all of the sentences where Lars is in and out of her life, I forget you never quite figure it out, right? Because they're not even chronological. So they're just literally by the alphabet. So it could be I'm seeing Lars tomorrow and then we've broken up and then I've just met Lars, and like all of these, but this accumulation of these people and these thoughts by jumping all over it. It's poetry, but I don't know. It's its own thing. Have you read them, Lucy?
Yeah, and I did really like them as well. I think I was maybe a bit like you, but taken aback by how easy it was to read, given that you were at sea quite a lot of the time with it. But I think it also did make me think a little bit about some really good literary diaries that I like. And I do think Helen Garner's also falls into this category, as much as she's very good at clearly has edited it into, the different volumes into discrete narratives of their own. There are some entries in there where you read them for the poetry of the sentence, right? Or you come across mentions of people and of course they're not explained because it's a diary, so nobody says this is so and so and I've had this, I've known them for so long. So I think that what I found Sheila Heti's book did was it concentrated all those things that I like about diaries anyway into these. It made the poetry of it very clear. It made the poetry of individual sentences very clear, and it made the way that you have to make connections between people as well. So it was like a concentrated burst of very good literary diary keeping. And then from that sort of extrapolate and realise that actually I'd probably read the diary of anyone whose writing I loved, regardless of how interesting their day-to-day life was. Even if they were a hermit up in an attic, I would still want to read their sentences on the page.
Yeah, that's my one regret about Sheila Heti's Alphabetical Diaries is that I would really, really, really love to read Sheila Heti's diaries. Just give me the, 60,000 word journal. I would be really interested to read that.
Then Kate the Word Doc if you're listening, Sheila.
Well, there is so much more to say. Even in my non-fiction stack, I've got books that I was dying to talk about that I haven't managed, and perhaps you two are the same. But we also wanted to talk about some fiction, but I think we're going to have to end it here for the main show. But I do have a little home for extra content, and that is over on the Patreon. So listeners, if you want more, I will put the link in the show notes and you can come and join us there and hear about the fictional diaries that we love. But for now, Lucy, Phil, it's been the greatest pleasure exploring this favourite subject with two such brilliant, interested and informed readers. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you for having me. It's been really lovely to hear your recommendations as well. I've got a long list. I've got to go out and buy the Vanity Fair diaries tomorrow.
That's nearly it for this episode, and as ever, you'll find all the books we referenced in the show notes. But wait, there's more! If you want to hear part 2, in which we talk our favourite fictional diaries, including a series of books I love so much I've read them 4 times, head on over to our Patreon page. For a small monthly fee, you can sign up to hear that episode, plus there are loads of other benefits. You'll get ad-free episodes of the main show, plus access to the archive of episodes on there I've made just for subscribers. There are over 30 editions of the Book Club Review Weekend, my slightly more informal show that comes out between main feed episodes. Plus, at the higher tier, you can come and talk books with me in person as part of our monthly book club. This month, December 2025, we're reading Christiane Ritter's gem of a memoir, A Woman in the Polar Night, which is her account of an Arctic winter she spent with her husband in an isolated cabin in the far north. If you've dreamed of getting away from it all over Christmas, this is the book for you. And although Ritter doesn't have an easy time of it, Laura and I both love this book for her dry humour and her sensitivity to the natural world around her. Book Club takes place on the last Sunday of every month over Zoom with a catch-up episode posted soon after for anyone who couldn't make the live discussion. And we're about to pick our books for January, February and March, so come and have your say in what we read next. My final plug for the Patreon is that you'll get to be part of the most amazing community of readers, keeping in touch via our chat threads. I find out about so many good books this way, I can't tell you, and I'm so grateful that people want to come and take part and support me in making the pod. So come and check it out. You'll find the link in the show notes. But there's another way you can show your support, and that is to help me spread the word about the show. I've had some lovely messages from people for whom the pod has come up on their Spotify Wrapped. One listener had logged over 20,000 minutes of listening, which puts her on a level with me. If you enjoy the show and can take a minute to share it, whether that's telling your friends or a favourite bookseller or posting about it online, that helps it reach new listeners, who I hope will enjoy it too. Next up is our Christmas special, in which Phil, Laura and Sarah are joining me to hash out our favourite reads of 2025. It's always such a fun one. I can't wait to record it and then share it with all of you. Drop me a line at thebookclubreview@gmail.com or find me on Instagram at bookclubreviewpodcast and let me know your favourite reads from the past year, whether new releases or books that were new to you. But for now, thanks for listening and happy book clubbing.